In 1170 BC, Egyptian workers dropped their tools right at the royal tombs. No one moved, no one worked. Their wages were delayed for 18 days. They were not slaves, they knew their worth. Hello, friend. You're on the Kurtop channel. Today here are 10 facts about ancient Egypt that didn't make it into the textbooks, about hygiene, money, strange laws, and something that definitely wasn't talked about in school. Some of these facts are funny, some are creepy. One of them personally blew my mind. I'll tell you which one, but only at the end. Stay tuned. In just a couple of minutes, you'll look at Egypt in a completely different way.
Зарплата пивом.
The workers who built the pyramids were paid in beer, not just on holidays, not as a bonus. Every day, 45 liters per person. Money didn't exist at all. Imagine, you're hauling stone blocks weighing 2.5 tons each for 8 hours. Your back is burning, your hands are worn out, and finally, it's the end of the day. The overseer comes up to you and hands you a bucket of cloudy, thick sludge with pieces of grain in it. That's your salary, that's your money, that's your everything. Beer was different back then, not like today. Thick, almost like porridge. They drank it through a reed straw with a filter. Otherwise, you'd just be chewing the grain. Lots of calories, not much alcohol. But the main thing was that it was a unit of account, like the ruble or the dollar today, only in a bucket. Official science says it was barter, a logical system under those constraints, an agrarian civilization without coins. But here's what doesn't fit into this simple picture. In papyri, they found records of bonuses. For overtime, they gave extra grain. For special work, oil or cloth. For long service, a large ration. So they had a system of grades, bonuses, and categories, without a single coin, but more complicated than in some modern companies. The first mint in Europe appeared around 600 BC. By that time, Egypt had already been keeping tax records for 1,500 years, paid salaries, penalized for shortages, just without metal. And when their salaries were once delayed, the Egyptians didn't stay silent. They did something that went down in history forever. I'll talk about this a bit later in the third section, because what they did, the world kept repeating for another 3,000 years. Shaving the entire body. The Egyptians shaved their entire bodies every 2 days. All means all. Head, armpits, legs, eyebrows, eyelashes. The priests did this 4 times a day. It became fashionable not because it looked better. It was because in a hot climate, with tight clothing and animals nearby, lice were everywhere. And body hair was seen not as normal but as a threat. Dirt, impurity, and insult to the gods. Herodotus recorded this personally. He came to Egypt, looked at the priests, and wrote something like this. They are the only people in the world who shave not for beauty, but for cleanliness. A Greek accustomed to beards and curls saw this as something alien. Mainstream scholarship says a religious ritual of purity associated with the cult of the gods. But here's a detail that's usually not mentioned. At the same time, Egyptians wore wigs, expensive, heavy, made from real human hair, sometimes from horsetails. Wealthier people wore more luxurious wigs, made entirely of others' hair. The idea was simple. Your hair is dirty, but someone else's hair shows status. Imagine a modern person who shaves their eyebrows every morning and then puts on fake ones. That's pretty much what it looked like. And here's what's interesting. A modern person spends about 70 hours a year on hair care on average. Haircuts, styling, washing. An Egyptian priest spent just as much time but on completely removing hair. 4 times a day. Every day. No days off. Razors are found in tombs alongside food and jewelry. That is, among the things considered essential for the afterlife. A sword is understandable. Gold makes sense. A razor. Welcome to Egypt. But their hygiene wasn't as perfect as it seems. They shaved perfectly, 4 times a day. But by the age of 35, everyone had lost all their teeth. And sugar wasn't to blame. Bread was the culprit. Teeth sand. By the age of 35, most Egyptians had lost almost all their teeth. Not because of sweets, not because of poor hygiene, because of bread, ordinary bread. Grain was ground on stone mills. The millstones crumbled, and the tiniest particles of sand and stone got into the flour every day, every meal. You were literally brushing your teeth with sandpaper from the inside, slowly, invisibly, unstoppably. The enamel wore down to the gums. Then came abscesses, then sepsis, Then the end. Egyptologists opened the mummies of pharaohs, people with unlimited access to the best food in the country, and found their teeth worn down to the roots. Ramses II, one of the greatest pharaohs in history, could hardly chew by old age. A great warrior, a great builder, a toothless old man. The official explanation is the costs of an agricultural civilization. The milling technology was imperfect. But here's what's interesting. They had a recipe for toothpaste. It was found on papyrus. Crushed eggshells, ash, pumice, bull hooves. They cleaned with their fingers. Toothbrushes didn't exist. The paste worked. It balanced acidity, removed plaque. Modern toothpaste appeared in the 1890s. The Egyptian one was 3,500 years earlier. It's just that the bread was stronger. And one more detail that's usually not mentioned. In the Ebers Papyrus, which is a medical treatise from 1550 BC, there are detailed instructions for treating toothaches, tooth extraction, and abscess irrigation, something similar to filling with resin. They knew about the problem. They treated the consequences. They just couldn't eliminate the source, the bread. Not because they didn't understand, but because without bread, there was no food. Imagine, you know what's killing you. You see it every day. And you can't stop because otherwise you'll just die of hunger. It's not ignorance, it's a trap. And by the way, when Egyptian doctors did try to treat people, the government watched their every move very closely. The price of a mistake was this. Some modern surgeons would go gray from that. The doctor and the fourth day. If a patient died on the fourth day of treatment, the doctor could be executed. Not for sloppy work, not for drinking on the job, but for deviating from the instructions. That's how it worked. For the first 3 days, the doctor could do whatever he wanted. He could experiment, try things, improvise. The state didn't interfere. But from the fourth day, he was required to strictly follow the book, the official medical protocol. Every step was prescribed, every remedy specified. If you deviated and the patient died, that was it. You were condemned. If you followed the protocol and the patient died, you were forgiven. The book was more important than the result. It sounds crazy, but wait. One British medical historian read this in a papyrus and at first wrote in his book, "A barbaric system that killed patients for the sake of following ritual." Then his colleagues explained to him that he had misunderstood. He removed that paragraph from the next edition, quietly, without explanation. Because in reality, the Egyptians did something ingenious. They divided medicine into 2 phases. The first 3 days were experimental treatment. The doctor tries, searches, takes risks. From the 4th day onward, it's standard, a proven protocol that had worked on thousands of patients before you. This distinction between clinical trials and standard treatment is a concept that modern medicine officially established only in the 20th century, only after several high-profile disasters with untested drugs resulted in deaths. Egypt wrote this down on papyrus 3,500 years before that. And one more detail. In the same Edwin Smith papyrus, 48 cases of injuries are described in such detail in the surgical treatise that modern neurosurgeons use it as a historical source, not just as curiosity, but as a source. For example, it describes a neck injury causing arm paralysis, mentions brain membranes, and even gives the diagnosis incurable. The Egyptian doctor honestly wrote when he couldn't help. Imagine a surgeon telling the patient the truth in 1500 BC. Do you think that's a coincidence? Or did they have a system that we still don't fully understand? Write in the comments. I'm really interested in what you think. And now, the next fact about workers who halted the construction project of the century and achieved their goals. The first strike in history. In 1170 BC, Egyptian workers put down their tools and sat on the ground, right at the entrance to the royal tombs. No one moved. No one worked. The construction stopped. Their wages, grain, and beer were delayed for 18 days. 18 days without food for their families. Without the ability to buy anything at the market. Without any savings because the system was set up so that workers received just enough to live from one payment to the next. They shouted, "We are hungry and thirsty." This is not a metaphor. It's a quote literally from the papyrus that is now in the Turin Museum. They personally overlooked this. These were not slaves at all. These were skilled craftsmen, masons, artists, sculptors with names, with families, with government housing in a special settlement called Deir el Medina. The state fed them, clothed them, provided medical care, and paid them a salary. They knew their worth, and they knew that nothing could be done without them. Mainstream scholarship says a single administrative failure and a typical incident. But the papyri show something different. After this strike, the authorities developed a system for checking supplies. Records of regular warehouse inspections appeared, and there was reporting on the distribution of rations. One strike, and the state restructured its logistics. They didn't just get what they wanted, they changed the system. For comparison, the first official trade unions in Europe appeared in the early 19th century. British workers fought for the right to strike for decades, through courts, through parliament, through blood. Egyptian craftsmen did it more simply. They sat on the ground and said, "We are hungry," and they won the same day. Their wages were delivered that evening, right to the gates. 3,000 years later, European trade union activists faced hard labor for the same action. And the Egyptians simply sat down and waited. And since we're talking about how Egyptians solve problems in unconventional ways, the next fact is about that, about women, about rights, and about what happened 3,000 years earlier than you might think. Women and rights. An Egyptian woman could own land, file lawsuits, take out loans, and demand a divorce in 1500 BC. Not as an exception, but as the norm, written into law. When European historians first encountered these papyri in the 19th century, some decided that the documents were fake because what was written did not fit into any picture of the ancient world they knew. A woman buys land, a woman wins a court case against a man, a woman specifies in the marriage contract what she will take in a divorce. One British Egyptologist wrote in the 1880s, "Obviously, these are exceptional cases related to royal families." 40 years later, another 300 similar documents were found about ordinary women, traders, weavers, wives of craftsmen. He never commented on this topic again. The papyri preserved specific cases. A woman named Irie sued her brother for their father's inheritance and won. Another woman, Nennefer, bought 3 slaves on her own, without her husband, without permission. No male witnesses. She simply came, paid, and took the document. A third woman made a will and distributed her property among her children, according to her own wishes, not her husband's. Mainstream scholarship says it's an exceptional system connected to the peculiarities of Egyptian religion and the cult of the goddess Isis. But here's what doesn't fit. This worked for 3,000 years, not just a century. 3,000 years continuously. Different pharaohs, different dynasties, different conquerors. The system remained. So it's not about religion. It's about the fact that it simply worked. Next, a comparison. Ancient Greece, the cradle of democracy as we were told in school, gave women absolutely nothing. No vote, no property, no rights in court. A woman in Athens was legally equated to a child, always under the guardianship of her father, brother, or husband. Rome was the same. British women gained the right to vote in 1928, French women in 1944, and Swiss women in the 1900s. Egypt granted women property rights 3,400 years before Switzerland did. And here's what's especially interesting. When Egypt was conquered by the Greeks under the Ptolemies, they came face to face with this system. Egyptian women continued to go to court, own land, and make deals. The Greek settlers looked at this with bewilderment. Some Greek men who married Egyptian women were surprised to find that their wives could be the first to file for divorce. It's said that some of them were not thrilled about it. The next fact about the law sounds like a joke, but it's not a joke. People were executed for breaking this law. And it wasn't Egyptians who were executed, it was foreigners who didn't know the rules. A cat was more valuable than a person. In ancient Egypt, the death penalty was imposed for accidentally killing a cat. Not for intentional killing, but for accidental. In the 60s BC, a Roman soldier ran over a cat with a cart. Accidentally. He didn't even realize what had happened at first. He only understood when a crowd started to gather around. The Egyptians didn't shout, didn't demand a trial, they just surrounded him, that's all. The Roman ambassador rushed over in person. At that time, Egypt was an ally of Rome, politically valuable and strategically important. The ambassador pleaded, explained, offered compensation. The crowd did not disperse. The soldier was executed right in the street. Herodotus described a similar case earlier and added a phrase that sounds like a verdict, on all Roman diplomacy. No intercession by kings could save the guilty. According to mainstream scholarship, it was the religious cult of the goddess Bastet. The cat was considered a sacred animal. That's correct, but that's only half the explanation. Here's the second half, which is usually not mentioned. Egypt lived on grain. Grain was currency, food, tax, and the army all at once. Granaries were literally the state bank, and the main enemy of this bank was rats. A single rat colony could destroy a month's supply of grain for an entire district in just a few weeks. Cats were the first line of defense, the only one, the most effective line of defense. To kill a cat meant to weaken the defense of the granary. It meant threatening food. It meant threatening the state. The death penalty for killing a cat is not fanaticism. It's economic policy wrapped in religion. The Egyptians understood this, and they wrapped it in religion on purpose. Because don't kill a cat, it's a sin before the gods' works. Better than don't kill a cat, it harms grain logistics. The first one stops your hand automatically. The second one requires explanations. Cats were mummified. Temples were built for them. In just one city, Bubastis, archaeologists found more than 300,000 cat mummies. 300,000. That's not a cult, that's an industry. When the Persian king Cambyses was at war with Egypt, according to legend, he ordered his soldiers to carry cats in front of the ranks during the attack. The Egyptian archers lowered their bows. The city surrendered without a fight. I don't know if that's true or not, but the very existence of this story shows how seriously the Egyptians treated cats. Today, cat content is the most viewed content in the history of the internet. Billions of views, thousands of memes. There are entire channels just about cats. Egypt started this 3,000 years ago just without Wi-Fi. What do you think? Is it a coincidence, or have cats always known what they're doing? Write in the comments. And the next fact is about something completely different, about how the Egyptians solved a problem that people don't talk about in polite society. And they solved it so effectively that modern science has only recently confirmed it. Contraception, crocodile dung. Egyptian women used crocodile dung as a contraceptive, mixed it with honey, and used it as a barrier method. This is not an insult. It's not a folktale. It's a documented medical prescription from the Kahun Papyrus, one of the oldest medical texts in history. It was written around 1850 BC. When Egyptologists first read this in the 19th century, there was silence in the meeting hall of the British Scientific Society. Then someone laughed. Then everyone laughed. They recorded it in the section Curiosities of Ancient Medicine and forgot about it for 100 years. In the 1960s, American biochemists accidentally returned to this topic. Not because they were looking for it, they were just analyzing the composition of various organic substances and discovered something inconvenient. Crocodile dung and manure have an acidic environment. An acidic environment kills sperm, so the method worked. A 19th century British Scientific Society meeting would have gone very quiet at that moment. But that's not all. In the same Kahun Papyrus, several other methods of contraception are described. Tampons made from linen fibers soaked in honey and acacia. Acacia releases lactic acid when it decomposes. Lactic acid is the active component of modern spermicidal gels, the very ones that are sold in pharmacies today. The first synthetic spermicide was created in the 1950s. The Egyptians used a natural equivalent 3,800 years before that. Without chemical laboratories, without microscopes, without any idea about sperm cells at all, their existence was only discovered in the 17th century. They simply observed, noticed what worked, and recorded it. Mainstream science says accidental discovery, an empirical method without a theoretical basis. But wait, the Kahun Papyrus describes not just one or two methods, but more than 10. Different substances, different ways of application, different situations. This is not an accidental discovery. This is systematic observation over generations. This is research, just without the name research. Imagine a woman in 1850 BC. She comes to a doctor. The doctor opens the papyrus, finds the right section, explains the methods, and she chooses. This isn't barbarism, it's a medical consultation. And honestly, they shouldn't have added crocodile dung to the honey. Most likely it just scared away the nearby rats. But overall, the direction was absolutely correct. And since we're talking about Egyptian medicine, the next fact is about it as well. About an organ that the Egyptians considered completely useless. They would throw it away during mummification, just into the trash. And that organ was something without which you wouldn't be able to finish watching this video right now. The brain as trash. During mummification, the brain was thrown away, just thrown away, with a metal hook through the nostril. They inserted an instrument, mashed the contents of the skull until it was liquid, turned the head over, and disposed of what flowed out, like construction waste, like scraps of fabric, like ashes from a hearth. The heart was carefully removed and left inside the body. The lungs, stomach, intestines, and liver. Each organ was packed into a separate canopic jar with a lid shaped like a protective god. They were kept next to the mummy. They were protected and considered sacred. The brain was discarded while the heart was seen as the center of thought, feeling, and the soul. When an Egyptian said, "I thought," he would place his hand on his chest, not on his head. When he said, "I felt," he did the same. In this worldview, the brain was simply a filler for the skull, something like packing material. Official science says, religious delusion is characteristic of pre-scientific thinking. That sounds logical, but here's where it starts to fall apart. In the Edwin Smith Papyrus, a surgical treatise written around 1600 BC, there are 48 detailed clinical cases with symptoms, diagnosis, and prognosis. Among them are several accidental head injuries. The Egyptian physician notes, a head injury causes loss of arm function on the opposite side. A neck blow leads to loss of speech. Injury to a certain skull area makes a person unable to recognize loved ones. He noted the connection between the head and body. Yet during mummification, the brain was still discarded as waste. Imagine a doctor who observes every day what happens to people after head injuries, who knows for sure that something inside there controls the body, and who, on the same evening, notes down and then assists with mummification and calmly throws the brain out through the nostril. Because religion says one thing, but his eyes see another. This is the first documented conflict between observation and dogma in the history of medicine. 3,000 years before Galileo, 3,000 years before the church banned dissections in Europe, they were trapped by their own system. They knew, but couldn't apply it. They saw, but couldn't name it. Modern neurosurgeons regard the Edwin Smith Papyrus as a historical source, not as a courier, not as a dog, as a source. That is, terms that have no analogs in any other ancient medical system in the world. The brain was discarded, but observations about it were recorded. This is perhaps the most human aspect of this whole story. And the last thing I promised at the beginning, the fact that personally blew my mind, is the following. And it's about a ritual that the pharaoh performed publicly, on schedule, and which was recorded as an official state act. Masturbation as a matter of state. The pharaoh was required to masturbate into the Nile, publicly, on schedule. This is not a metaphor, not an insult. This was a documented state ritual with a name, a date on the calendar, and official witnesses. According to Egyptian cosmogony, the god Atum created the entire world in exactly this way. By himself alone, the first act of creation was not a flash of light or a word, but exactly this. And the flooding of the Nile, on which the harvest, food, taxes, the army, and the very existence of Egypt depended, was directly linked to this primordial act. The pharaoh reenacted the creation of the world every year, in the right month on the right day. This was not lust, it was a state necessity. Mainstream scholarship says a fertility ritual typical for agrarian religions of the ancient world. That's true, but usually that's where it stops. And that's when things get interesting. In certain periods of Egyptian history, this ritual was performed not by the pharaoh himself, but by a specially appointed priest, an official representative with a title, with prescribed duties, signed in the temple charter, with a salary. It was a position in the temple's official staff list. Imagine you're coming in to apply for a job. They give you a papyrus with a list of duties. You read the first item, you read it again, you look at the scribe. The scribe looks at you. Absolutely serious. Welcome to the oldest HR department in human history. But here's what really amazes you. If you step away from the absurdity, the Egyptians built an entire theological system around this ritual. The calendar of the Nile's flooding, astronomical observations, the priestly hierarchy, the logic of the state. All of this worked as a single mechanism, and it worked for 3,000 years without a hitch. For comparison, the Roman Empire lasted about 500 years, the British Empire about 400. The Egyptian civilization, with this ritual in its calendar, lasted 3,000 years. Maybe there's nothing to laugh at, and one more thing that is usually not mentioned. Greek historians Herodotus and Diodorus Siculus wrote about Egyptian rituals with barely concealed horror. They called them barbaric, obscene, and unworthy of a civilized person. At the same time, Greek religion includes the cult of Dionysus, with rituals that are better left undescribed in daylight. But for some reason, Herodotus wrote about them much more mildly. What belongs to others always seems more orderly than our own. And one last fact before the finale, which I've saved specifically, because it's about money, about prices, and about the fact that Egyptians knew the value of absolutely everything, from a loaf of bread to a divorce, with accuracy down to a single unit.
Зерна.
Of grain, a price list for everything. In ancient Egypt, the price for everything was recorded. For bread, for beer, for renting a donkey, for divorce, for funerals, for weddings, for a doctor's services, for a place in a tomb. All of this was recorded. All of this was regulated. Deviating from the price list was punished with a fine. The papyri preserved specific figures. A pair of sandals cost 2 deben of copper. A cow cost 140 deben. A wooden door for a house cost 3 months' worth of a worker's rations. Embalming of the highest grade cost a talent of silver, which was about a year's salary for a skilled craftsman. Embalming of the lowest grade was 20 times cheaper. But at that time, the brain was discarded, and it wasn't the only organ that ended up in the trash. Mainstream scholarship says a centralized planned economy is characteristic of a theocratic state. That's true. But here's what's interesting. Prices were not just fixed, they were public. They were posted at the entrances to temples and at the gates of markets. On the walls of administrative buildings, anyone, literate or not, could approach an official and ask, "How much does this cost?" And the official was required to answer according to the price list. No bargaining, no markup, no, "I'll give you a discount." Cheating a customer was a criminal offense. You come to the market, the merchant names a price. You know that according to the price list, it should be different. You go to the nearest official, and the official finds the merchant on the spot. This is not a fantasy. This is described in the administrative papyri of the New Kingdom era. Now compare it to today. In most countries of the world, consumer rights protection as a separate legal concept appeared only in the middle of the 20th century. In the United States, the first federal consumer protection law was in 1962, and in Europe, systematic protection appeared in the 1970s and 1980s. Egypt introduced a public price list and criminal liability for deceiving a buyer 3,000 years before that. And there's one more detail that completely changes the picture. In the papyri, they found legal rights. Ordinary people, not officials or priests, knew about them, took merchants to court, and won. A woman named Kinu Nefer filed a complaint against a fabric merchant who raised the price by a tridebina. A tridebina is less than a kilogram of copper. It was a tiny amount, but she went to court and won. Because the system worked, not perfectly, but it worked. Today, the average person in a developed country would think 7 times before suing over being overcharged at a store. An Egyptian woman, 3,000 years ago, simply went and won. That's all about the Egypt we were shown in textbooks. The Great Pyramids, mysterious hieroglyphs, golden masks of pharaohs. Behind this facade, salaries paid in beer, crocodile dung in the pharmacy, cats worth more than Roman soldiers, and a public price list at the temple entrance. So the Egypt we were shown at school is the front entrance. Pyramids, pharaohs, golden masks. Today we entered through the back door. Salaries paid in beer, eyebrows shaved off, teeth worn down by bread, doctors under threat of execution, workers who sat down and won, women with rights 3,000 years before Europe. A cat worth more than a Roman soldier, crocodiles in the medical handbook, brains thrown away, a pharaoh on schedule, and the price of divorce posted at the entrance to the temple. None of these facts are made up. They are all found in papyri, in museums, in tombs. There just wasn't room for them among all the conquest dates. If you found this interesting, subscribe. The next episode is coming soon. There are even more secrets there too. And write in the comments which facts surprised you the most today. I'm really curious. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, everyone.